Greetings, my name is Blaze and welcome to my channel. If you've not been here before, I talk about thought, theory, and my personal interpretation when it comes to things that I'm interested in. Today's video is going to be dedicated to tea. Now, I want to clarify in advance and give a fair warning. I am not making this video because I'm an expert when it comes to working with tea or herbs in general. In fact, if anything, I'm more of an enthusiast. A lot of the stuff that I've been introduced to since I started studying a lot of the New Age revival reconstruction stuff has been through word of mouth from other individuals or from books and some online content. With that in mind, I still like talking about this stuff, so I want to share my personal interpretations and theories with its use. Now, tea is an interesting topic just due to the fact that it is readily available for most individuals to use, and there are both spiritual reasons to consume tea as well as potential health benefits involved as well. When it comes to consuming anything, though, I highly recommend that you be extremely careful and cautious. It is probably best to either use pre-prepared tea that you can buy from the store, which is considered safe, or talk to a healthcare professional. You also have the ability to reach out to an actual certified herbalist if you so choose to do so. With that part out of the way, I want to talk about both what tea is, different ways of using it, and why I personally feel like there is a very magical and mystical way of working with tea. And yes, technically, coffee would also fall into the classification of some of the things that we're talking about with tea. Interesting fact about coffee. Coffee does not actually come from a bean, it comes from a cherry pit. To begin with, a lot of my introduction to herb stuff, and if you've been watching my content for a while, you realize that I've been reassessing many of the things that I believe were true. I've been studying a lot of this stuff, so I was born in '81, started looking at a lot of the stuff in the '90s. A lot of the sources, like I said, you had some hearsay from other individuals, and you had a lot of books, especially through companies like Llewellyn Publications. Now, I mention them because they're one of the bigger book publishers when it comes to New Age stuff. So some of my books, this is one of the first books that I had got on herbs, and of course it's going to show see-through because of my background, so. But either way, so this here is Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs, and I've had this, I don't even know how long I've had this for, I don't remember when I got it, and it's in a little bit of rough shape. I usually like to take good care of my books, but this book here is purely from the spiritual side. So when they go over herbs here, it doesn't really talk about their use in teas. It talks about its spiritual and ritual use. So if you were going to be burning herbs as like an incense or something to use during a ceremony that you might be doing a ritual, or if you were going to create a sachet, which I might be pronouncing that wrong, but basically it's a little pouch of herbs, this is a great reference. But for tea and consuming things, I don't consider this to be a great reference. Still, my first introduction. So then we get to the one where you can kind of make some things where you're consuming, or topical ointments, again, caution, and that was another Cunningham book, The Complete Book of Incense, Oils, and Brews. In here, it has nothing about tea. Now, it does talk about tinctures. We're not going to talk about tinctures today, but tinctures, there's different ways of consuming herbs, and tinctures is one of them, ointments is one of them, infusions, elixirs, and we'll talk about that in some detail here. The only book that I've gotten, and this is a more recent book that I've picked up, is The Way of Herbs. And this one actually does, look at that, you can see through it again. This one actually does talk about some of the actual more medical and health uses that you can do with herbs. This book is by Michael Tara, LACOMD. I don't know what those initials stand for, but in case you wanted to check it out or pick it up. On page 4, they talk about methods and applications, and they talk about medical herb teas. In here, they talk about an infusion. Now, the way that I understand it, infusions is basically how you make tea. So let's go to a few websites. I wanted to give you some book references on some of the places that I'm coming from, and we'll give you some website references as well, because that is my current quest with this. The whole purpose behind this video is not to come at you like an expert, but it's to talk about things that you might be interested in, and it's to give you resources that I have used and looked at and considered. So if you are more of an expert on herbs, or you have better resources, by all means share them in the comments below, and I'd be happy to check them out and learn something myself. But I just want to get on the same page here, and I want individuals to consider things such as, like, if you are going to consume tea, or any herb in any fashion, be aware of what you're consuming and that there could be, you could have allergic reactions, and sometimes they can be severe. So you got to be careful. So again, typically when I'm consuming tea, and I drink tea, I love tea, I'll usually have green tea. And again, that would be classified as, I consider it, a type of infusion. So tea itself, you can go to Britannica.com, tea, and it talks about what it is. So it's produced by steeping in freshly boiled water the young leaves and leaf buds of the tea plant. So technically, I guess you could say that tea is a specific plant, but they still use the classification from tea. Like if you have chamomile tea, is that really considered tea? I don't actually have an answer for that, but people will have stuff like chamomile or turmeric or other types of tea that are not actually from the tea plant, which is interesting. Now the steeping versus the infusion piece, I wanted to look this up as well, and I found on this page here, let's see, tastingtable.com talks about the difference between infusion and steeping is basically the temperature and how long you let it sit for, but all infusion comes from steeping. Now, infusion is basically where you're taking the herb and it is being absorbed into the material that you're consuming. Typically, in this case, it's water. There is tinctures, which is a little bit different. Tinctures work with alcohol, and we're not going to talk and dig into that in much detail today. There's a couple other websites, too, that I had pulled up besides for the definitions. Like Wikipedia's got some pretty decent references. I know not a lot of people like it. Then we can talk about different ways of preparing tea and the different types of things you can put into it. And typically, in most cases, it is some sort of a dry herb that you're putting inside of the water in order to allow it to infuse with the water, and then you're pulling those herbs out. I know some people will drink it with the herbs in. Most time it's like a tea bag, or you can actually buy a like little capsule, like a metal reusable strainer that you dip in, and once it's been infused into the water, you pull it out and then you drink the hot water. Just a couple more websites here just talking about some of the different ways of creating infusions, or even you can let the herb sit in the sun and let it do it slowly over time. Now, why is this something that I'm bringing up? Why do I feel like this has some magical stuff associated with it? Here's a couple more references for you. I'll post a lot of these links below. You can look through them yourself, but it's just to give you other references for different ways of preparing, essentially, tea. A lot of people today work with 5 elements, and as I'm starting to understand, I'm tracing a lot of this back to Hermetics. So like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn type of stuff. A lot of that stuff will come from some of the Indian practices, talking about like Hinduism type stuff from the country India. So the 5 elements that a lot of folks use today and a lot of modern neo-paganism, they'll say earth, air, fire, water, and then the 5th one they kind of argue about. In many cases they'll call spirit. The reason I think that tea is so neat is it actually, in a way, touches upon all of those elements. So check this out. When you are preparing tea, you are basically taking water, so you have the water element right there. The water is then being introduced to fire to be heated. So now you have hot water, so that's a combination of both water and fire together. Once you are done with that, you are pouring the hot water over herbs, which is essentially earth. So now you're taking water and fire and combining that with earth. Hot is going to cool over time through the air. You're going to have the different aroma coming out of the tea as it basically wafts through the air. So now you have the element of air being introduced. You take water to fire, you take fire to earth, and then you take that mixture and you introduce it to air. Now the last piece, the spirit part, is where the magical nature comes in depending on the individual. So putting your intent or a blessing over your tea before you drink it, you can essentially add a 5 elemental ritual ceremony to your drinking consumption of tea. Doesn't mean you have to. Doesn't mean tea is this the only way of consuming tea. I mean, you can just drink tea, right? Of course. But this is just kind of a neat way to do what I like to call everyday magic. Just have it as a part of a daily ritual. Now, a lot of people, I think, get too caught up in what the term magic actually means. You know, they think of fantasy and video games. But if you look at the old clans and the tribes, the wise people from the past, whether you want to call them witches or druids, depending on the culture, whether you want to call them Volva a wizard even, which is a more modern term from the 15th century. These different terms that you have from these different cultures, shaman and medicine people and wise people, these individuals looked at and studied nature. Our modern medicine is derived from the usages and interactions from these people of the past. Medicine tries to separate it, but there still is an element of connecting with that raw substances in nature, our connection with the earth itself, and how to interact with it, and its best usage on our health, and our spirit, and our mind, our body, just a whole connection, our whole self, or the holistic part, the whole self. So tea is a nice way of connecting between those two. You can look at that herb that you're consuming and look at the actual health benefits from a medical perspective, but you can also take this to a spiritual, magical, or even esoteric type of approach, and you can still get the benefits of both. Some people are very spiritual, and they put great intent in what they're doing, and this is one way of practicing that every day. To me, magic, yesterday's magic is today's science. There's not much of a separation. It is an understanding. To truly become knowledgeable and wise is to understand how different things interact. Always asking those questions, learning from those who came before us. And it doesn't matter if it's a website, doesn't matter if it's a book, doesn't matter if it's listening to another individual. You can still bring this practice in your daily life, no matter what you're doing, even if it's just a daily ritual of drinking your tea, and add a little extra spice to it, a little extra spirituality in your daily path so that you can truly live your path. So hopefully you found this interesting and helpful. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Are there particular infusions that you like to make at home, that you like to consume? What are they? What led you to them? And do you have references if it's not directly from a store-bought package, but you make it yourself? Do you have references on why it's safe for possible different type of allergic reactions individuals might have experienced in the past? Basically kind of medical related stuff on if someone was to consume that. Because again, please take caution when consuming herbs you're unfamiliar with, especially if you're just taking it from comments. But also, what do you think about this whole 5 elemental thing being all consumed in this little drinking of tea? Does that make sense to you? Is that something you already do, or is that something you might consider doing? But yeah, as always, share your thoughts below. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.